Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859 to mixed reactions. One critique was that if, as he claimed, all species were related, why did we not see transitional or intermediate forms? If birds and reptiles shared ancestry, how come we never saw anything in between? The first fossil of Archaeopteryx, a small dinosaur intermediate between birds and reptiles, was discovered in the early 1860s, confirming that the transitional forms Darwin had imagined must have existed if his theory was right were actually out there. Darwin must have been thrilled. I don't know if he was a champagne drinker, but I hope he had a glass of something celebratory when he got this news. The key point here is Darwin's idea that if his theory was right, then something like Archaeopteryx must have existed, even though it hadn't yet been found. His ability to imagine what might be out there is what changed our view of biology. Here's a more recent example. Up until about 30 years ago, everyone knew that peptic ulcers were caused by stress. But microbiologist Barry Marshall looked at a lot of patient data, and he saw a correlation between ulcers and bacterial infections, which he knew a lot about. And he imagined that bacteria might be the real cause of the problem. Now, just imagining this didn't make it science and certainly didn't convince anybody else, particularly since it didn't fit with current understanding. He had to test the idea, which he did by deliberately infecting himself. He got pretty sick, but he knew exactly why, and he knew how to treat it. His wife was a little freaked out, but it ended well. Marshall and his collaborator, Robin Warren, got a Nobel Prize in 2005 for figuring out that the real cause of ulcers were strains of the bacterium Helicobacter pylori. The kind of disciplined imagination in these examples is what drives science. Disciplined imagination means starting with what you know, imagining what might be true based on that, and then testing it, finding Archaeopteryx, or designing an experiment to test your hypothesis. Hypothesis, by the way, is the science word for what you think might be true based on what you currently know. If, like a lot of people, you were taught science as a big pile of facts, you missed out on the most important part. Disciplined imagination builds on facts, but science is much more than just the facts. And this misunderstanding of science as a pile of facts is a problem. One of the reasons it's a problem is it alienates a lot of people. Creatives who think science isn't creative, or people who aren't good at memorizing facts, who are made to feel stupid. But there's a difference between being good at knowing things and being good at thinking. And science needs people who are good at both knowledge and thinking. And in particular, people who are good at creative thinking on the basis of knowledge. The second problem with this misunderstanding of science as a set of facts is that new discoveries can actually undermine trust in the science. And we've all seen this. Early in the COVID pandemic, official guidance from the NIH was that only healthcare workers should wear face masks. But then as we learned more about how the virus was transmitted through airborne particles and droplets, and that masks could effectively block transmission, the guidance changed. We should all be wearing masks all the time. With the development of vaccines, the guidance shifted again. mask use was optional if you were vaccinated. And then infection rates began to rise. And once more, we were told we should all be wearing masks. Unfortunately, the fact that the guidance shifted multiple times severely undermined trust in science, even though the changes were based on progress in understanding infection risks and how they could be controlled. So, what do we do about this? How do we address this misunderstanding? One thing we can do is teach science differently. I've been teaching science for almost 30 years, and my number one goal is for my students to get better at thinking. That's why the biggest assignment in my evolution class is a creative writing project. Students need to describe the evolution of a species that exists only in their own imaginations. For example, they need to figure out the evolution of female mate choice in the Elvis mouse, which is based on male hairstyle. Or the communal grooming behavior of a desert rat that cultivates plants on its back. Or how embryonic development has been altered in the blooming lizard so that it can fool its prey into thinking it's a flower. The first question students ask when I introduce this assignment is, do we have to do research? No, there is no published research on the Elvis mouse. But nearly all of them decide to do research anyway. They decide they want to know more biology in order to imagine their species more clearly. Nearly all of these papers come in with substantial reference lists. This assignment works because it asks students to do exactly what scientists do. They can't just memorize biology. They need to invent a fictional species that plays by the rules of biology and integrate as much real biological knowledge as they can. Especially with the rise of AI, the most valuable skill students can develop may no longer be knowing the facts, but having the curiosity and the disciplined imagination to explore the unknown. Students get so invested in their species, they don't even want to use AI. They prefer to engage their own imaginations and build on their own knowledge, not hand the assignment off to a piece of software. Besides teaching science differently, we also need to view science differently. Not everyone is a science student or a science teacher, let alone a scientist. But science underlies all kinds of decisions in all of our lives about our health, our use of technology, our personal and collective priorities. Should I get yet another COVID booster or flu shot? Should I use AI to write my talk? How should we tackle global challenges of public health, food security, or climate change? And if the science keeps shifting, why should I trust any of it? Because disciplined imagination, not just accumulation of facts, is what drives science, we should expect change. Shifts in scientific understanding are a reason to trust science more, not less. When something we thought we knew turns out to be wrong, the take-home is we realized it was wrong, and we corrected it. That's a victory, not a failure. And yes, it might change again. If it does, and provided the change was based on science, not politics, that's evidence the system is working. We need to appreciate not just what we know, which is a lot, but also what we don't know yet. Engaging in disciplined imagination is both useful and exciting. Students don't use AI for their fictional species project because they want in on the fun part of science, building on what they know to imagine what might be out there. A pitcher plant that grows at cave entrances and preys on bats. A cliff-dwelling penguin that has re-evolved flight. A marine-adapted species of horse, native to the Isles of Shoals. The species are fictional, but the thinking is real, and the kind of disciplined imagination that gives rise to diverse, delightful, and plausible fictional species is exactly the same as the kind that drives real science. The power of science has never been knowing the answers. It has always been the ability to build on what we know, imagine what else might be true, and then test it. That's not just important for teaching science. It's the engine and the heart of science itself. Thank you.